In this episode, we talk about a new blood test developed by the doctors at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Delhi, that may help monitor the effectiveness of cervical cancer treatment. We also talk about Omar Abdullah's hopes regarding statehood being restored for Jammu and Kashmir. But first, we talk about the violent protests that erupted in West Bengal's Murshidabad against the Waqf Amendment Act. Hi, I am Niharika Nanda and you are listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. On the 5th of April, the President of India gave her assent to the Waqf Amendment Bill after it was passed by both houses of the Parliament.
माननीय सदस्यगण, शुद्धि के अद्यतन मत विभाजन का परिणाम इस प्रकार है। पक्ष में 288, विपक्ष में 232। प्रस्ताव स्वीकृत हुआ और विधेयक यथा संशोधित पारित हुआ।
Honorable members, subject to correction, ayes 128, noes 95, abstention 0. The bill is passed.
This act makes changes to how Waqf properties are managed and regulated. For those who don't already know, under the Muslim law, Waqf properties are those donated in the name of God for religious or charitable purposes. These properties are governed by state Waqf boards and cannot be sold or transferred. Since the bill was passed, protests have been taking place in various parts of the country, including West Bengal, especially because the new law allows non-Muslims to become CEOs and board members of the Waqf boards and also permits government officials to take decisions on disputed properties. Now, last Friday, protests in the Murshidabad district of West Bengal turned violent, leaving 3 people dead and many others injured. To understand how the protests turned violent, its aftermath, and what the current situation in Murshidabad is, we are joined by the Indian Express's Sweetie Kumari. So, Sweetie, tell us, what do we know about what happened on Friday in Murshidabad and how did things turn violent?
So, Niharika, after Waqf bill was passed, there have been protests across the state in West Bengal. Since day one, there have been separate protests. So, the violence started on Friday, but there have been protests in Murshidabad even before that. On Wednesday and Thursday also, there were massive people were on road protesting against Waqf Amendment Bill. The residents of minority areas were filled with fear that, once this is implemented, their properties will be captured. And with that fear, they have been protesting on road. Now, Wednesday and Thursday, the police tried their best to communicate with clerics and, imams and things were under control. On Friday, after the Friday prayers, a massive number of people, mostly in the age group of 14 to 19 years old, they started protesting in Murshidabad against this Waqf bill. Now, what initially was scattered protest in different pockets of Murshidabad, as the day passed towards the night, this turned into a consolidated protest, I would say, and triggered violence. So there was unruly mob at night on Friday, and it started off from the evening after, Friday prayers, and they started attacking people's house. Roads were blocked, police vehicles were torched, several public properties were set on fire. So basically what was initially a scatter, out of fear, some people had started protesting. It later basically turned out to be a joint protest across all the minority pockets of Murshidabad. And then it went out of control, and we all know that the situation was volatile.
And now 3 casualties have been reported, and we understand that several other people have also gotten injured during these protests. So tell us what we know about the victims and how this happened to them.
Yeah, so there have been around 15 to 20 police injured. There are many, around 40 to 50 local people who were injured. There were many houses, one after another, which were ransacked, torched, set on fire. Part of the violence, when a mob is not in control, the unruly mob, just to show strength, they were attacking everyone and anyone who was coming in their way. So you rightly said that there have been 3 casualties, as we know. One is in Shamsherganj area, where we know that the father and son were hacked to death. This Chandan Das and his elderly father, Hargobindu Das, was, hacked to death by a section of people. Basically, they had attacked his house and it was ransacked. And third that we are talking about is of Izaz Ahmad, if I'm not wrong. So this man died of police firing. Basically, as I told you, that the situation went out of control after the Friday evening's prayer. And the police initially tried to restrain and, through dialogues, they tried to control the mob. But when it went out of control, there was firing. And reportedly, this guy under Suti police station area died of police firing. So there have been 3 casualties, many injuries, and there have been continuous communal flare-up in the area.
And Sweetie, the Indian Express also spoke to the families of the deceased, right? So what are the things that they had to say about all of this?
So our reporters spoke to the family of the deceased, and this family is definitely inconsolable. They have lost 2 members of their family, not in a condition to speak. But one thing that is very important to, talk about is the family claims that for 3 hours they continuously tried to call police, but nobody came for their rescue. And in fact, even after the death, they said that the dead body was lying in their house premises for nearly 3 hours. So we can just imagine the kind of trauma this family has gone through during this violence, because even when their house was attacked, even when they were attacked, they were constantly trying to get in touch with anybody who could just come and control the mob or could save them. But seeing somebody dying in front of you, your own family members, definitely the condition of the family is beyond words.
And for those of our listeners who might not know, could you tell us a little bit about Murshidabad and what's the atmosphere been there like since the bill was passed?
See, Murshidabad is in South Bengal, and it's a district which has a significant Muslim population. Many areas which is highly populated with Muslim community, and it has a very complex socio-political landscape, I would say. And since the passing of Waqf bill, there has been a palpable sense of fear among people. And as per reports, locals have been informed, I was misinformed, that once the bill is passed, their properties will be taken, their mosques will be razed. So there have been a fear. And as I told you, that it's a minority-dominated area. And we know when we talk about Murshidabad, definitely what comes to our mind is migrant labor. So the young blood is a huge part of this district, and they are all migrant laborers and from Muslim communities. So what went wrong, that is part of the investigation, and what actually triggered the violence. And to this scale, protest and violence, stone pelting somehow now have become common. But this is a large scale, there have been relentless violence in this area that will be investigated, as police are saying. But I would say that since the time Waqf was passed, there has been a sense of fear and tension among people. And that tension, turned into violent protest and such incidents.
And Sweetie, we understand that anticipating such a situation, security in the area had already been tightened to prevent the protests from turning violent, right?
Yeah. So Niharika, see, there is always an intel and input which is available with police whenever there is such large-scale protest happening across the state. Similarly, in this case also, police had information that there are protests happening in Murshidabad in different pockets, in different areas. So accordingly, senior officials were also there. But, the point is they could not apprehend, they could not understand the scale of mobilization. The scale of mobilization of protest in Murshidabad was very high, and which police could not control. And, it took time for police to send reinforcement in the areas. And, because whenever there is violence, you basically, send police personnel from nearby police station, from the near district. So it took time and the violence escalated. So the Calcutta High Court during one of the hearings said that they cannot turn a blind eye to the kind of violence this Waqf bill protest has triggered across the state. And by then, the violence in Murshidabad had escalated to a very, uncontrolled level. So naturally, Calcutta High Court ordered that there should be deployment of central forces. We were speaking to BSF officials and they said that initially, as per the request of the state, they deployed 300 BSF personnel locally. And then after the Calcutta High Court's order, initially 400 companies of BSF personnel were deployed in the area. Later on Sunday, another 5 companies of BSF were sent on ground to, contain the situation.
And you also had the opportunity to talk to some of the security personnel. So what did they have to say about the situation and how it developed?
Yes, I was talking to one of the BSF official and just to understand what's happening on ground and what are they facing. So they said, when they initially reached the area and trying to contain the situation, they faced massive protests from the locals also. In fact, one of the BSF officials was saying that police had direct access to many areas, whereas the BSF were directly being targeted. And a few of the BSF officials also received minor injuries, and they also had to, open fire in the air in Ghoshpara while trying to control the situation. And in their language, the situation was really grim. Now it is better and improved.
Right. And Sweetie, the BJP has claimed that over 400 Hindus from Dhulian fled across the river to take shelter in a school in Malda's Besnab. Is that actually what happened?
You rightly said, Niharika, the BJP has alleged that over 400 Hindus from Dhulian area have fled their home. It is not totally incorrect. I would not comment on the numbers of the family because there have been no official statement on that. But we have to understand the geographical situation of Murshidabad. There is a river in between Murshidabad and Malda districts near Dhulian. And now after, as per reports in the families were being attacked. So to save their lives, they basically crossed the river and are now taking shelter in Vaishnav Nagar, which is on the other side of the river in Malda. So even during a press conference today, ADG Law and Order Javed Shamim said that many families actually fled Murshidabad and they are taking shelters in their relatives' house in nearby districts, and they have already initiated process to ensure that they return back home safely. And as per information available, around 19 families have already been brought back to their homes safely. And the process still on. So we don't know the exact number of families who have left Murshidabad, staying in their relatives, taking shelter elsewhere. But yes, the situation was so grim that they had to flee. They had to just leave the place.
And how has the TMC government responded to all of this? Have we heard anything from the Chief Minister regarding it?
The TMC has been appealing for peace and, have been saying that our focus is to bring the situation to normal and so that, people are back to their normal life. And since the bill was passed, Mamata Banerjee has been saying that she doesn't stand by it and she will not allow anything to divide the people of Bengal. But after this violence, the focus has been on restoring peace and so that the situation is normal. Because it also, highlights the failure of the state administration. Whenever there is a violence, it could be communal, it could be something else. But ultimately, it also highlights the failure of police and state administration. Naturally, as the head of the state, she's trying to, put a brave face and saying that we are focusing on prioritizing on restoring peace. So TMC's stand is very clear. They are also, counter-alleging BJP of spreading rumors and utilizing this opportunity politically to consolidate Hindu votes. So there have been allegations and counter-allegations from both sides. But as state's chief minister, Mamata Banerjee is constantly appealing for peace to restore peace in the area.
And now, Sweetie, has the police begun its investigation? Have any FIRs been filed or any arrests been made?
Yes, so far, as per police, more than 200 people have been arrested for violence and arson cases, and they are saying that many FIRs have been filed. We don't have the exact number of FIRs available with us, but the police said that the number of FIRs are going up every minute. And in a press conference today, ADG Law and Order Javed Shamim And he said that on one hand, while they are focusing on normalizing the situation, they also wanted to send a strong message that whoever was involved in the violence, be it trying to instigate anybody or anyone involved in ransacking anybody's house, anyone who was found involved in any possible way in the violence or to escalate this violence in Murshidabad will not be spared. ADG Law and Order categorically said that the person might be from any community or any political parties. Nothing would be seen, and anyone who is found to be involved will be, charged with proper sections.
Right. And what is the current situation in Murshidabad?
So, shops are shut. Roads are shut, people are indoors, internet continues to be suspended, prohibitory orders are also in place. So when we talk about the current situation, yes, for last 36 hours, as per police, there has been no fresh violence in the area, but there is a tension prevails in the area. There is a tense situation in the area. BSF, official paramilitary forces, police are jointly making efforts to, do route marches and do exercises to build confidence among people so that they can just step out of their house, feel normal, feel at peace. So the situation has improved, but it might take a day or two for people to, come out and feel safe in the area. Today the ADG BSF has also gone to the area and he will also take stock of the situation and try to reassess the deployment of forces. So on ground, there has been no new fresh reports of violence, but situation remains tense.
And next we talk about a blood test for cervical cancer. Doctors at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Delhi, have developed a new blood test that may help monitor the effectiveness of cervical cancer treatment and potentially detect the disease earlier. Cervical cancer is the second most common cancer among women in India and is linked to persistent human papillomavirus or HPV infection in more than 95% of the cases.
So there are certain HPV strains which are high risk, and if infection with that persists, people may get cervical cancer. Almost 80%, actually more than 80% of the cervical cancers are caused by the HPV infections.
That's the Indian Express's Anona Dutt, who reports on health for the paper.
It is persistent in India because of a few reasons. One is we do not yet have a vaccination program. So countries like Australia, which have had a public health program to vaccinate children for HPV, they have seen their number of cervical cancer cases drop drastically. So that is one intervention that would help in bringing down the numbers. But also it has been associated with, poorer outcomes in people from lower socioeconomic status without access to proper facilities for hygiene, etc. So that is another reason why we do see more cervical cancer cases in India.
In this segment, my colleague Ichha Sharma speaks to Anona about how the AIIMS blood test is pivotal and what are its implications on cervical cancer care in the country.
And Anona, how is cervical cancer typically diagnosed and monitored in India today?
So cervical cancer screening has started recently, a few years back under the government's Ayushman Arogya Mandir program. So these are the primary health centers where they do check for the three most common types of cancers actually, which is cervical cancer, oral cancer and breast cancer. To diagnose cervical cancer in general, I'm not talking about the program, but in general, usually say a woman around the age of 30 years would undergo something called a pap smear. So pap smear is essentially where cells from your cervix are collected on a swab, and that is, watched under a microscope to see whether there are cancerous growths. That is something that has to be repeated every few years for women at risk of cervical cancer. But other than that, in low resource setting, there's also a very good test which is known as the visual inspection with acetic acid. So for this test, 3 to 5% solution of acetic acid is applied on the cervix. And because of the type of reaction that the acid has with proteins in the cells, the cancerous cells become whitened out. So you can see these whitened patches, and that can tell you that there is an abnormal cell growth, which could already be cancer or which could be leading up to precancerous lesions. Then they have to go for confirmatory tests. These are for screening. Then, of course, when you have to confirm that someone has cancer and what stage the cancer is at, then you would, of course, undergo biopsy like any other type of cancer.
So what exactly is the new blood test developed by AIIMS, and what makes it pivotal in cervical cancer care?
So I would like to emphasize here, this is early research. It's not that this test might become available tomorrow, but it is a very positive movement. So this particular test, a blood test to monitor the cervical cancer, is meant for when a person has already been diagnosed. This is not for the screening where I've mentioned, of course, the pap smear and the acetic acid test is done. So they can continue to be utilized for a screening for cervical cancer. These are tests that can be easily done. But when patients are undergoing treatment for cervical cancer, they have to repeatedly undergo scans and different tests to keep a track of how their cancer is responding to the treatment and whether the tumors are shrinking, whether there is a relapse. And these scans can be avoided with the help of the blood test. So this is where the blood test comes in. Basically, the blood test can tell you just with like a simple analysis that whether a tumor is growing, whether it is shrinking, whether a person has relapsed.
And Anuna, what are some of the challenges women face in accessing cervical cancer screening in India?
So, of course, cervical cancer screening has improved over the years. Now, the PHCs are also screening for it. That's a good step. However, with cervical cancer, since it's something for which the doctor needs to access the private parts, they have to do the, for swabbing for the pap smear or for acetic acid, they have to access the cervix. So that is why a lot of women tend to be shy and not go for it. That is one of the biggest challenges to screening for cervical cancer.
And speaking of the study, how was it designed? Like, what were the researchers specifically looking to detect in the blood?
So the idea was simple. The researchers wanted to have a blood test that could tell whether the tumor is growing in size or whether it's shrinking. And what they have done is correlated the levels of this DNA of HPV. So HPV is the virus that causes the infections, as I mentioned earlier. So what they've said is the level of the DNA of this virus in the blood, so the free-flowing DNA, actually correlates quite well to the size of the tumor. So what they have shown in about 60 cervical cancer patients who were undergoing treatment at AIIMS and another 10 healthy subjects, the doctors were able to show that the level of this free-flowing viral DNA correlated with the size of the tumor. So, for example, the cervical cancer patients before starting their treatment, and mostly all of these patients, about 90% of them were in stage 2 or stage 3, so their tumors had grown. The level of the free-flowing DNA was found to be 9.35 units. And after they started undergoing treatment, when they checked again after a few months, 3 months, they found that the level had gone down to 7 units. And they were able to show that in the healthy individuals, the level was at around 6.95 units. So what this shows is that the free-flowing viral DNA in the blood actually correlates to the size of the tumor. And now they would need to do bigger studies to establish that this could, become the first line of test that cervical cancer patients undergo instead of all these scans.
Right, and as you mentioned before, this is an early research. So what is the path from proof of concept to actual clinical use? Like, what kind of trials or regulatory steps lie ahead?
So first of all, this has been done in a very small sample. It's 60 cervical cancer patients only. So the researchers would have to do larger trials to show that this finding holds true for even, a bigger group of people, especially people from different regions of India with different, say, genetic makeup or different environments, etc. So they will have to show that this works consistently. Once that is demonstrated, of course, they will have to undergo a lot of regulatory processes to get it approved, and they would have to find partners who would be willing to manufacture it at scale for the test to take off. Now, the challenge here is that the industry, academia collaborations are not that great in India. So for some research from lab work to actually becoming available in the market, it takes time. Fortunately, that is changing. We do see a lot of tests or other products developed in research institutes such as AIIMS or ICMR now finding its way to the industry, and the industry taking up the responsibility of conducting these larger trials, because the institutes may not always have the funds to do so. So that is happening more and more, but it is still a challenge to take technology from an institute such as AIIMS to the market finally.
And you note in your story that this development is coming at a time when India is considering a nationwide HPV vaccination program. So how does vaccination and this test fit together in the broader prevention strategy?
So the vaccination, so if we start vaccinating children today, it will reduce the incidence of cervical cancer in the future. In fact, from what we've seen in other countries that have implemented the vaccination programs, it's likely to drop drastically. So that is something, the benefits which we would see in the future, but at the moment it continues to be the second most common cancer in women, and we have to keep treating the patients who already have it, and this is where this test would become useful if brought to the market soon. These patients would be able to benefit from that.
And lastly, Anona, if proven successful, how feasible is it to integrate this blood test into the health systems? Like, do we know how much would it cost?
So we do not know the cost yet, because this is still very early trials, and right now, of course, this has been done in a very academic laboratory setting. The prices would, of course, be very different when it becomes commercially available. However, it is a blood test that works on the principle of amplifying the viral genetic material, just like we do RT-PCR for detecting COVID-19. But this is a more precise method to do it. So it's a more sensitive instrument which can pick up very small amounts of DNA as well. So the pricing would depend on the cost of the machines and the assays, etc. But we cannot give a final figure yet.
And in the end, we talk about Jammu and Kashmir. Yesterday, in a political pushback, Jammu and Kashmir Chief Minister Umar Abdullah declared that the appropriate time for the restoration of statehood to Jammu and Kashmir had arrived, even as his National Conference Party came under fire for allegedly stalling legislative discussion on the contentious Waqf Act. A day earlier, the BJP had accused Abdullah of appropriating its promise of restoring statehood and advised him to focus instead on the unfulfilled promises made by his party. Hitting back, Abdullah asserted that his recent meeting with Union Home Minister Amit Shah had left him optimistic. He was quoted as saying by the news agency PTI, quote, "We think the appropriate time has come. 6 months have passed since the assembly elections. Shah came here. I had a separate meeting with him. A good one. I am still hopeful that JK will soon get its statehood back." Unquote. The remark follows a charged comment from senior BJP leader and leader of the opposition in the assembly, Sunil Sharma, who dismissed the NC's renewed statehood pitch as disingenuous. Sharma said, quote, "Statehood is our narrative. It's the BJP's promise. Abdullah should rather focus on fulfilling the promises he made to the people." Unquote. Abdullah's renewed assertion also comes in the backdrop of criticism surrounding the Waqf Act. Opposition leaders, including members of the NC, sought a discussion on the legislation through an adjournment motion that was denied by Speaker Abdul Rahim Rathur on grounds that the issue was sub judice. The move sparked uproar, with opposition parties accusing the Speaker, who is from the NC, of shielding the government by stalling debate. Clarifying the party's position, Abdullah responded to the controversy by stressing procedural correctness. He said, quote, "The Speaker made everything clear on the last day. Perhaps the mistake by the members was that they brought an adjournment motion. An adjournment motion is only brought to discuss the works of the JK government because the government has to respond. Tell me, had that adjournment motion been accepted, how would we have responded, as the Waqf bill was not brought by us? It was passed by the centre in the parliament." Unquote. While Abdullah continues to push the return of statehood, he has remained cautious on the larger issue of Jammu and Kashmir's special status, revoked in August 2019 with the abrogation of Article 370. He has repeatedly stated that the fight for special status is far from over, but tempered expectations of any immediate reversal. You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's episode was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Ichha Sharma and me, Niharika Nanda. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcast and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.